Okay, having said about the outline, next we want to talk about what is a discussion section. Okay? Well, the discussion of a research paper is where you summarize and interpret your research findings. Specifically, the discussion should highlight the significance of findings in relation to findings obtained in previous studies, including those of your own studies. So it should be, in a coherent picture as a whole. And also, the discussion should explain your research findings in relation to appropriate theories that you could find or you have proposed in your introduction, the literature review. So remember, you need to have a theoretical analysis of your practical or empirical finding. And also, discussion should address limitations of the present study and future directions of research in the end. So if we can summarize what I included in discussion section, there are 5 components. First of all, there is a summary of the findings, meaning what are the major findings of your study, whatever topic you address. And second, interpretation. What do the findings mean? Does it really prove what you want to see, a particular hypothesized or expected effect or relationship or not? Okay? And thirdly, implications. Why do the findings matter? Whether it was something expected or not expected, or it was something positive or negative, depends on what you propose at the beginning of your study or your research paper. You need to address the present findings, how they matter for further studies or for previous studies in this particular field. The fourth part is the limitations. What problems are there in the present study? However unique or well done a particular study is, there are usually some limitations that you need to address. And this is part of our formatic writing, that we always address the limitations of a study. This is to show our academic humility or modesty, that we don't overclaim our findings, we don't make overgeneralizations or overinterpretations of findings. We always say, however significant the present study is, there are still problems that need to be addressed or resolved in the future. And talk about our future studies, the fifth part is recommendations. So you point out the problems, that's not the issue. The issue is what specific recommendations or suggestions you have for the future. So what could be done, or what further studies could be done in the future. So you have to have these 5 elements in your discussion section, which is different from writing a results section. Basically, you report results. Here you make more interpretations, and you with a focus, with some highlighting. Having said all of this, let's just look at them more in details. For instance, step 1, summarizing research findings of your study. You should start your discussion by reiterating your research questions or hypotheses at the beginning of the writing, and then summarize your major findings accordingly. And you should also present the concise statement of your major findings. You don't have to write a lengthy statement. You don't have to copy and paste what you report in the results section. You just give a briefer, a more concise description of what you have found reported earlier. And then you should directly answer your research questions rather than just repeating the data or the information you have previously reported. And here is an example of a summary of what you've done or what you have discovered earlier. Let's have a look. As you can see, the parts in red block, the highlighted parts for my study, and they compare the cultural differences in theorizing about creativity. And here is another example of a summary of findings. And you can see the part in red block highlighted the significance of my finding that the Chinese meritorious bias toward creativity. This is like something that's affirmative to what I've done before. This is a brief summary of the major findings of my study. Okay, let's continue to explore how to write a good discussion. Now, step 2 is to discuss interpretations of your findings. Or you start by highlight the significance of your research findings with regard to the research questions or hypotheses you have stated in introduction. And also, you would interpret and comment your research findings according to the type of study that you have conducted, such as it could be to identify the correlations among the variables, the data, or discuss the similarities or differences of your findings with previous research findings, and to explain the unexplained finding and provide alternative explanations. So this is the sort of things that you want to further, or at least you are trying to present in the discussion part. And here is an example of giving interpretations. Let's have a look. And as we can see, the part in the red block really shows the present findings in relation to previous findings, particularly in relation to my theorized concept of meritorious salience and how this matters for my previous studies. Well, this is something that you would customarily do in the discussion part. And here is another example. You can see the part in the red block is really a summary of what I discovered in this study in relation to studies that I've done before, not only of mine, but also of others. Well, the third step for writing a good discussion is to discuss implications of your study. You'll show how your findings are related to previous findings, rather than simply or only giving your own interpretations. You should also show how your findings match with some existing knowledge and what new insights they have contributed to the area of study or the present research. And you should also try to show how your findings successfully challenged some existing knowledge and what a new insight they have contributed to the field of study. Well, this is what you want to consider. You don't have to do this step by step. It's just overall consideration you have to keep in mind when you write discussion. And here is another example of a discussion writing. And you can see the part in the red block shows how my present study relates to previous studies, how my present findings, and how my present matter for study in the field. And here is another example of showing the credit of my study in relation to previous ones. Now, step 4 of writing a good dissertation is about acknowledging limitations of study, which means point out limitations of your study, describe what can or could be included in your present study, and discuss limitations that are directly relevant to your research objectives. Or this is a default, means you really have to go through this procedural writing for this part, and you have to think very carefully to add this. And here is an example of addressing limitations of study. You can see the part in the red block showing that. And this is from one of the articles I wrote before. And here is another example, and you can see the red part, the block part that shows the limitations of the present study and what could have been done better in the future. And step 5 of writing a good discussion is about making recommendations for future studies. Meaning, in this part or in this section, you should write recommendations, specific recommendations for future studies or further studies, and you should give concrete and specific suggestions as to what should be done in the future, rather than only saying that more studies are needed or more studies can be done. And you can see here is an example of recommendations for future studies, and give a very specific suggestion as what should be done in the future. You can see how I wrote for this part. And here is another example, also giving specific suggestions as to what should be done for studies in the future. All right, having said all of this, you should know writing discussion is different from writing results. You need to give interpretations. You need to highlight the importance or significance of the findings. You need to give a theoretical analysis, and also you need to talk about limitations and give recommendations for further studies. Having said all of this, are you scared of writing? Well, let me tell you something I hope you'll keep in mind. That is, Mark Twain, who is a famous American essayist, here's the best quote: "The secret of getting ahead is getting started." So you need to getting started, then you'll get ahead. Keep this in mind.